The Assyrian Empire took root between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a place historians now call Mesopotamia. It was a land filled with fertile soil and life giving water. The Assyrians quickly made a name for themselves by being great at siege warfare and using terror to keep their people from rising up against them. For proof the Assyrians were tough, one need look no further than the favorite sport of Assyrian kings. It was not badminton, or cornhole, or croquet. Rather, the kings of Assyria were known as fierce lion hunters. The kings of Assyria were able to spread their empire to historic levels thanks to a vicious army, a group of soldiers that was so effective because it demanded strict discipline within its ranks. The Assyrians were so ruthless that enemies of the state were often tortured, with many being impaled. The Assyrians were so demanding of discipline, it wasn't uncommon for any soldier who reported late for duty to be executed. Another thing that made them so powerful and intimidating was the fact that they routinely tortured their enemies with things like being flayed alive or having your eyes gouged out with a hot iron. Now you might be wondering what being flayed alive is, but I regret to inform you it's so incredibly disturbing that I'm not even going to tell you here what it means. And I know I can trust you not to Google it. I know you won't want to Google it because you've already heard me tell you how disgusting it was, so why would you even want to know what being flayed alive means? Alright then, I'm glad we've reached that understanding. So, what made the Assyrian army so tough? Well, for starters, all adults had to serve, and only the most talented soldiers were made generals. This system of promotion is known as a meritocracy, because you were being promoted based on your merit. In other words, you earned it, and you weren't being promoted just because you were besties with the top general. The Assyrian army had the best equipment available. They were among the first to switch from bronze weaponry to steel. This made their spears, swords, and knives much more durable and effective. The Assyrians also invented the modern combat boot, replacing the sandal with a boot equipped with a leather sole and reinforced shin plates to protect their men. Each soldier wore a conical iron helmet, a breastplate made of interlocking bronze and then later steel panels, and leather boots. The tallest men were made to be spear carriers, which makes sense because, the shortest men would likely wind up hitting their own guys with spears. Sorry, short guys. Shield bearers carried leather-plated shields with wicker inlays, and these men knelt before the archers to protect them. The archers would lob arrows at the opposing forces, filling the sky with thousands of these tiny little missiles. Stone slingers hurled rocks from great distances and with great accuracy. The charge of the Assyrian army was led by charioteers driven by teams of 2 to 4 horses. This group would storm through the enemy defenses, allowing their horses to trample any opposing soldiers who dared to stand in their way. When the chariots had busted through, the cavalry would storm in and begin slaughtering foot soldiers. In fighting on horseback, the Assyrian army enjoyed the same advantage as the Mongols would use 1,000 years later, a tactic that helped the Mongols conquer nearly all of Asia. Because of the massive amount of conflict that was seen at this time, many groups turned to constructing walled cities to protect themselves from invasion. Ever ready to evolve as a fighting unit, the Assyrians combated the walled cities by employing a tactic known as siege warfare. This involved surrounding the walls of an enemy city and staying there until the people inside ran out of food or water. When this happened, the citizens inside the walls would face tough choices. Staying put meant starving to death or dying from a lack of water. Fighting meant certain death. And most people knew surrendering to the Assyrians meant torture. As you can imagine, the average Mesopotamian didn't want to surrender to the Assyrians because, that being flayed alive or having your eyes gouged out with a hot iron thing didn't sound like much fun at all. Now the Assyrian army did try tunneling under walls and using ladders to scale walls, but these were either very dangerous or very time-consuming. This meant a siege often took months and in some cases years to be successful, and over time, the Assyrians grew impatient with sieges. So they developed something called a siege engine. The siege engine looked like a tank, walked like a tank, and could knock walls down just like a tank. So many historians consider the siege engine to be the world's first tank. The siege engine allowed the Assyrians to ram the doors of walled cities down and protected the Assyrian soldiers from any defenses the city might put up. And because there were a variety of walled cities, the Assyrians developed a variety of siege engines. This included the siege tower, a lopsided contraption which enabled the Assyrians to vault soldiers over the walls of a city more easily. The Assyrians also valued horses, so much so that they would never shoot a horse out from under an enemy soldier. Instead, they would try to capture as many horses as they could. In fact, there was a group of Assyrian soldiers whose only job was to capture horses during battle. So, if you were fighting the Assyrians, it was better to be captured as a horse and not captured as a soldier, for being captured as a horse meant the soldiers would feed you and water you and care for your every need. But if you were captured as a soldier, you knew what was coming. The Assyrian army was ruthless. For proof, listen to this Assyrian's king, his eyewitness testimony of his army's victory. I destroyed the ziggurat of Susa. I smashed its shining copper horns. I reduced the temples of Elam to naught. Their gods and goddesses I scattered to the winds. The tombs of their ancient and recent kings I devastated. I exposed to the sun, and I carried away their bones toward the land of Ashur. I devastated the provinces of Elam, and on their lands I sowed salt. Another king noted that his army slaughtered so many enemy soldiers that the rivers near the city ran red with their blood. Historians note that it was the Assyrians who gave rise to modern warfare, not only by creating the first tank and combat boot, but also by organizing their army into small groups that marched together with specific orders, instead of a giant horde of men who just ran around aimlessly. Now, if you're going to have a large army out there running around wreaking this kind of devastation on the world, you're going to need to feed and supply them. So, to feed their men and horses and keep their soldiers equipped with swords and bows and shields and conical helmets and hot irons, another thing the Assyrian army did was keep storehouses where extra food and weapons could be kept to more easily resupply the army. This allowed the army to travel great distances from home and eventually helped lead the Assyrian Empire into growing as large as it did. The storehouses allowed the army to travel up to 300 miles in any direction, and it was also a great place to store any important items the Assyrians had captured. You know, the stuff pirates called booty. And not that kind of pirate. That's a little better, but still not a real pirate. Okay, that'll have to do. That's actually Edward Teach, best known as Blackbeard. He was famous for putting cannon wicks in his beard before battle and setting them on fire. This gave the appearance that his head was actually on fire and made him look like he was possessed. A move that more often than not scared the people he was attacking into surrendering. It could have also been because they knew surrendering to Blackbeard did not mean this. The Assyrians were revolutionary when it came to warfare. Not only did they come up with the siege engine and combat boot, but they also used inflated sheepskins to float chariots and troops across rivers. Messengers relayed signals using fire towers or dispatches on clay tablets. When the Assyrians were victorious, they were often known for forcing an entire conquered population to leave their territory. Thousands of people were forced to relocate during the reign of the Assyrians, including the lost tribes of Israel, who were banished in 721 BC. But despite all the technology, perhaps the one thing that made the Assyrians most dangerous of all was Ashur's commandment. The Assyrians believed that the god Ashur was watching them at all times, and the soldiers were taught that as long as they kept conquering, the world would not end. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not looking forward to the end of the world anytime soon. I mean, I want to see my kids graduate high school. I want to watch IU win another national title. I'd like to go hiking in Yosemite National Park someday. Heck, I really can't think of anything that would be worse than the world ending. Okay, so maybe that is a close second. Still, with Ashur's commandment in mind, the Assyrian army not only fought fiercely, but they fought often, and they tried to spread their empire widely, all in an effort to please Ashur and, prevent the end of the world from coming. The Assyrians are known for many things. They had great architecture, built libraries, and valued knowledge. But perhaps the one thing the world will remember most is its fearsome army, a fighting force that was unrivaled in its day, and one the Assyrians would ride until they had amassed one of the largest empires the world had ever seen at that time. Oh yeah, not to mention having a huge impact on modern warfare, which is still felt today. This is Mr. Williams signing off saying keep laughing, keep learning, and always keep loving social studies.